Running the same old conventional textbook Washington campaign this time out just won't do.
Our schools are leaving a lot of kids behind. I happen to think that's the civil rights issue of the current time we live in.
We often wait too long to deal with an obvious problem.
And that within these borders, that we have the capacity for our people to grow, to prosper, to be free, to be safe.
Didn't want to go to work for a law firm. I didn't want to clerk for a judge. I went to work instead for the Children's Defense Fund.
If we really want to win this election, then we can't live in fear of losing it.
Lyndon B. Johnson, 36th President of the United States, said that, quote, "The vote is the most powerful instrument ever devised by man for breaking down injustice and destroying the terrible walls which imprison men because they are different from other men." Approximately 4 million Americans turn 18 every year. Of these 4 million, only about 1.6 million will vote in the next election for which they are eligible. Although young people make up an eighth of the eligible voting population, they are less likely to vote than any other age bracket by over 10%. According to the United States Census Bureau, only 41.9% of eligible voters between the ages of 18 to 24 voted in the 2004 election. Voting is an individual's voice in the government. By not casting a vote, an individual forfeits the right to critique the actions of the state. But more importantly, a lack of votes translates into a lack of comprehensive representation across America. However, if voting is so important, then why don't more teenagers vote?
Well, part of it's just the psychology of the age group. Again, efficacy, political efficacy, how much do you feel the system affects you? You haven't really been exposed to the political system much. You've been living your own life. You tend to be more inwardly focused. As a kid, it's all about yourself and your family. As a teen, there probably is no more self-centered age, no offense to any teenager listening, but it's the age where you're really focusing on yourself, developing yourself. Since you're not as engaged in society at large, you're going to have less of a feeling that you affect society. Teens tend to be a more alienated age. You're not really sure who you are, what your sense of identity is. So how society affects you is less well developed. You haven't really lived the life experience to discover how interconnected you are with politics, with these remote things that are happening at City Hall or at the state governorship. That's something that develops with age, which is why the older you are, the more likely you are to become politically active.
In order to sample political naivety among our peers, we decided to test a non-government related class on the candidates running for president in the November 2008 election. In order to do this, we created a slideshow with the candidate's picture and asked the juniors and seniors in the class to identify the person by name and party.
Rudy Giuliani, Republican, New York.
Oh, yes. How's the quiz?
Yeah, we want to name
There's four.
Democrat.
Delaware.
We were surprised by the results of the test. Not only did the students know the name and party of all the candidates, but they were also able to identify which state the candidate was from. Therefore, we came to a new conclusion that voting is dependent not on political knowledge, but political efficacy. Political efficacy is defined as a person's belief that his or her vote can influence the government. The reason that young people do not vote is because of a lack of political efficacy.
They don't pay their own bills. I think anytime the political realm influences your life in a personal way, and I'm being facetious, but I'm also being serious. I think when you start paying taxes and you do those things, your involvement in politics happens as a matter of course.
Young people don't see anything in government for them. Government doesn't reflect them. Candidates, politicians aren't speaking to issues that concern them. Issues of Social Security and Medicare are very far off into the future, and it's very difficult to get students to understand why those issues are significant for them.
There are many traits that influence the amount of political efficacy an individual or a group of people may possess. Studies show that people with higher levels of education are more likely to vote. Teenagers, especially high school students, do not have the degree of education that an adult in their 50s or even 30s has gained through college, graduate studies, and life experiences. Generally, married people are more likely to vote than people who are single because they have a spouse who can encourage them to be politically active. Since most young people are not married, they lack this additional motivation to vote. People with more monetary interests are more likely to vote because they have more to protect. Teenagers who have no substantial income or who are taking out loans for college do not have the incentive to vote to protect their pocketbooks. Teenagers heading to college are often subject to several addresses in a short amount of time. Many young people feel that re-registering and finding time to go to the polls on election day is too cumbersome for their hectic schedules. Because teenagers do not vote regularly, they lack the experience or habit that helps to increase political efficacy. Political scientists have concluded from studies that many voters vote simply because they are used to making time to go to the polls. Finally, teenagers are often apathetic and cynical. They do not see a difference in the candidates or trust the government. This apathy is fundamentally a loss of political efficacy.
Most 18-year-olds, have not reached the peak of their education. They haven't finished college and the rest. They don't have much in the way of wealth yet. There are not many rich 18-year-olds running around, and they're 18, they're young. So with those three things working against you demographically, you don't have as much of an investment in the system, you're not going to participate. The longer you've been playing the game, the more you get out of it, the more likely you'll play the game some more.
Political efficacy and voting are crucial to a government based on the people's will. Demographics that do not vote are a concern because their wants and needs are not being met by the government. It is important to understand that the government is simply a tool that the public uses to benefit itself. But how can we, as high school students, affect change in our peers?
All right, there's an old expression from Willie Sutton, a bank robber. You rob banks because that's where the money is. Politicians go where the votes are. Old people get a lot out of government, Social Security, Medicare, prescription drug benefits, precisely because they vote the most in large numbers. Typical election, you're going to get a 70% or 80% voter turnout for people over the age of 60. Meanwhile, the average population, across the whole population, the voter turnout's around 50% or lower, and in teens, it's going to be in the 20 to 30% range.
Young people particularly have everything to gain by becoming more aware and educated and getting involved. But you have to start with caring, and you have to want to be educated and find the cause that you really feel strongly about, because then you're more likely to stick with it. And as we all know, with politics, change often comes slowly, and you have to be really committed.
Many young people must realize that many of the major issues of the modern day, such as Social Security, are only prevalent because they pertain to those elderly citizens who are reliable voters. If teenagers were to flood the polls, they would see that problems such as the cost of college would be addressed by politicians. However, simple activities such as talking to one's parents or friends about politics can increase political efficacy. Researching, volunteering, working the polls, and interning are other more active steps that teenagers can take to get involved. Any way that young people can learn how the government works increases their political efficacy. In the words of Sir Francis Bacon, knowledge is power.